Welcome to Beyond the Play, a brand new show hosted by UCTV Sports with Professor Doug Glanville. We set out on this show in an effort to observe and discuss the connection between sports and real-world issues, aiming to have thought-provoking discussions on social issues in sports, generating a conversation that moves from the playing field to our broader society. As student journalists, we look forward to engaging with professionals to better understand the way that sports are inherently connected to social issues. We are fortunate enough to have an expert along with us for this show. Professor Doug Glanville is a former major leaguer for the Cubs and Phillies, a distinguished journalist and commentator, and a professor in the UConn Sport Management Department where he is currently teaching the Sport and Society course. Professor Glanville, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really thrilled to have you on board for this show.
No, it's great to be here. Very excited. More and more, it's important that we look at this convergence of sport, society, outside the classroom. We find there's so much information, so much news, and so many ways sports is relevant in our lives, playing this tremendous role. So looking forward to it.
hmm Speaking of sports, since the Major League Baseball season just concluded, the Dodgers won. It's fresh on our minds. We can kind of take a recap and look back at the season for what it was because it was so unprecedented. And, we can look at what we saw from the players and the Major League Baseball front office. But before we do that, I wanted to start with this. Looking back on your early career in like the mid 90s with the Phillies and so on, from your own personal experiences with the influence of outside issues affecting your sport, like how do you think you would act as a player today? And when you were a player, how did you act when you were confronted by outside forces that were affecting your play?
Yeah, I sometimes grapple with that sense of, who I was as a person during that time. You think about my career. I came up at 25. I retired at 35, roughly. And it was a different part of my life. I wasn't a father, I wasn't a parent, I wasn't a husband. So I had different priorities. I was kind of single on the road. And so that would have informed quite a bit of my decision. Now I've always been conscious about the sports role, the impact, the platform, and I've tried to engage as much as possible. It comes from my legacy of my family. My dad is an immigrant from Trinidad and Tobago. My mom grew up in the Jim Crow South in North Carolina, and they had their unique challenges and always spoke on issues. So I'm confident I would have been involved in many ways. As you know, on the professor level, I like to have information. I like to make sure I can back it up, and I also try to prepare where I'm going with it, not just say, okay, we're protest, make a scene, things, and then not follow up. The protest has to kind of connect the dots to something, even though it is important to make those statements. We've seen many examples in history. Martin Luther King, in his letter to Jackie Robinson, about, you have these entities that work in the back end, legal, making change in policy, what I call the slow work, and then you need people to bring it to the forefront. And so as an athlete, I think at that time, I probably would have tried to straddle that to some degree, be out there, but also be informed, just like I did for being a rep for the Players Association.
hmm
Now, fast forward as a parent, I know I would see it differently because, you have this sense of commitment to the future, whatever it is, you just feel driven by making it better. And somewhat as a professor, connects very well because I do see this next generation, and I feel a different obligation just teaching and being part of that because it's very reciprocal, and it informs me in thinking about what the future can hold and how, where I'm a driver and where I have to sort of defer to what your generation, for example, is 20s or, early 20s, late teens, what you're experiencing. So all that would come together. I'd like to think that I would have been very active in what we're experiencing right now had it happened when I was playing.
You don't think that if you did speak out, you would face some sort of negative repercussions from doing so when you were playing?
I would have. I'm sure I would have. And that sort of comes with the territory. And I look now as a writer in my post baseball career, and I've gained a certain maturity. I've gained a certain way to engage, and I've really gained a confidence in what my objective is when I do challenge issues. Yes, I call them out. Yes, I definitely establish that this is something that is not inclusive or whatever it may be. However, on the other end, I try to be informed. I try to share. I try to educate, teach, and be open to challenges. And in the spirit of that is sports. That's how I see the role of sports, this nature of bringing people together as a team, this nature that comes with being obsessed with equity, right? Rules, and they have to apply to everyone. They have to be balanced and fair. And although we don't achieve this to perfection, it's what we strive to all the time as athletes, as in this environment. So tapping that would be a outcome that I would be looking for. And I think that's constructive. I do think it's something I can have a lot of confidence behind, in not shying away from, yes, this is a good thing. This is a way that we as people, different people, can rally together behind it as one.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes a big difference in the confidence of stepping out there. And because I've done this a lot now, just writing, taking on a lot of issues, I feel very, very comfortable in the space, even though the subject matter is difficult.
From my perspective, I feel that after opening weekend of this season, the MLB was passive again. You know, in the NBA, every single game, the national anthem in the bubble was aired, with every player, for the most part, taking a knee arm in arm along the sideline. And with social justice messages displayed on the back of every player. And at every single break in the action, there was a reminder to go vote. And NBA social media accounts were tweeting during halftime to make sure you registered to go vote. And educating and getting people involved in not just the political process, but the process of communicating about what's going on in society and learning to make a change. But in the MLB, you know, opening weekend, there was great, you know, camaraderie and togetherness and just a sense of a brotherhood with the teams, you know, lining up, holding the big black, you know, sort of tarps type thing in unity. And a lot of players were kneeling. But then after that sort of tapered off. There were no messages on the back of jerseys. There wasn't necessarily as much attention during every game. So what do you think about that? Do you think that it was sort of a conscious decision by the MLB to maybe protect their bottom line, knowing their demographic of viewers is probably a little more old, a little whiter than the NBA? And just how do you compare that to what the NBA did, really putting social justice at the forefront of their return to play?
Well, baseball is complex. I mean, partly there's a large degree that they weren't really sure what to do. I mean, and that, you know, and it's okay to say that, you know, if you're an institution that you're not really sure what to do. You have, yes, you have a different demographic. You have international players. Latin America is 30% of the league, roughly. You have a different flavor to it. Now, what the opportunity is with those differences is that when you have players endorse, support unequivocally Black life and its significance, its importance, its mattering, and you have players that are not necessarily who are Black, right? But they're endorsing it as something central to humanity. That is actually very powerful. It's very different than having surrounded by everybody who looks like you, who have that experience, and saying Black Lives Matter, of course, because that's your experience. But when you have people like you, Darvish from Japan, saying Black Lives Matter and actually trying to embody that in a certain way, there is a certain kind of power and opportunity there that I don't want to dismiss. But it is messy. It's messy because people are coming at it from different places, perspectives, understandings, agreements. And so they don't know what's the right, quote, right way to express it. Is it kneeling? Is it this? I mean, in the end, symbolism is important. The performative gestures get people's attention. But what endures is the sustainable work behind the scenes. That's what endures. And I think it'd be very much more powerful to see, hey, here's what we're doing. Yeah, we had our opening day. We tweeted out something really cool about George Floyd. But now this is what we're doing. Our hiring practices, our diversity initiatives, our whatever it is, like we're partnering with this group. And some of that's happened. The Players Alliance with Curtis Granderson, a player in Major League Baseball, highly respected Black player. He created an organization to kind of work on these issues a little bit more sustainably. But baseball is a little bit of a fish out of water in this regard. And I think, yes, to a degree, they weren't going to keep airing it over and over again. They kind of said, all right, we'll make our stand, we'll show our unity, and then we may fade in the back a little bit and quote, play ball. And that's one thing, but then what else are you doing? And I'm sure there are things happening, but the statements is one thing, but it's hard to see that progress unless you're consistently engaging on it. And it's tough. I always say this, baseball embraces Jackie Robinson for sure. But the Robinson was a complex figure. He wasn't just this silent warrior in the late 40s, he was often very engaged. And you look at his post-career, he was on the streets. He was an activist. He challenged people. He wrote letters to Congress people, and he was in people's face, debated Malcolm X. This was not a passive man by any stretch. And there's an aspect of Robinson that baseball could reflect back on and say, this is the Robinson we may need to channel, because he got stuff done and he tolerated nothing less than equality. That was his goal.
Yeah, Professor, I want to jump right into something that you wrote back in 2019. I think this is really, really important for this last point. But you wrote that I do not have the luxury to decide when I'm done talking about racism because I have to live with it. The public will eventually lose interest in this controversy. Now, I'm bringing that up because, just like everyone here, that first weekend of baseball, I'm watching the Washington Nationals play the Yankees. And I see the entire Yankees line up with Black Lives Matter shirts on for warm-ups. Then I see them go out there and they're kneeling. And I see the Black Lives Matter logo behind home plate. And it was great. But it seems like after this initial push for the Major League Baseball to promote social change, they moved on from the issue in like a week, reflecting much of the trend across the country. So do you think that the display of Black Lives Matter that opening day in Washington was in genuine support of the movement, or just for visual approval, which is kind of reflective of a lot of other corporations and media groups around the country that kind of did the same?
Well, I think there's a both to that answer, that, they're always weighing these business sensibilities. And if you have a certain audience, and we talk a lot in class about demographics, right? Who is your audience? Who are people paying attention? Who are the people? And baseball's aware of that. Not any sport's aware of that. And so you have audience to say, hey, I'm going to turn the channel because I see a Black Lives Matter and it's political or whatever it may be. You do have a challenge there. Now, it doesn't allow you the hall pass, I'd say, to say, ignore the fact that, sure, I'd love to bifurcate my life sometimes and say, yeah, I want to be a ball player. I just want to play ball. But then I look at my life and I say, yeah, I just wanted to shovel my driveway when that police officer asked me if I was shoveling for money. I just wanted to get a cab at LAX when the guy told me that to go take the bus, it's $19. I just wanted to just call the game and innocently just be a Cubs analyst until someone wanted to throw an ambiguous white supremacy sign behind my head. Yes, all true. But that sums up really life in Black in America. That is the reality. I don't get to choose. I would not choose to experience these things I'd love to just focus on certain things. And so, yes, there's a collision there, because especially you look at other sports like the NBA, NFL, like you have all these Black players who have this existence. And they can't just be like, oh, I'm going to just be between these lines and this is it. And more when you experience these things, you just feel an obligation to tell your whole story, because people are making up all kinds of story, writing about, oh, you're a great wide receiver, but then they're not telling the pain that may drive you. They're not telling you of the loss you carry with you. They're not. That's who you are too. And I think the greed of it is this: we expect 24-hour coverage all the time in these players' lives and whatever happened, but then we don't want to hear part of that 24 hours. We want to carve out all these times that shape their life in painful ways because of racism and whatever it is, sexism, whatever they may, WNBA players and so on. So yes, I get that. If I'm a fan and I see this as an escape, I understand that. I understand that I was on the field and I want to play and be free. True. But I'm not. I'm not always in that position. And maybe it's not the burden of fans always to feel that, but it's inextricably linked in my life. And in some ways, I don't speak that as a negative. There's an aspect that's I'm proud of, because I do get to be part of something where I'm brought together by a common experience. There can be greatness in that, but it also can be pain, and a lot of pain, because when it's racialized in the most negative aspects of our society and not inspiring, but criminalized and so on, then you start to look around and say, what can I do about this? I remember talking to Adam Jones when he was in Baltimore, who spoke out quite a bit on the N-word was hurled at him at Fenway and so on. And he said, one of the big moments for him was with family members who were Black going through this experience and looking to him and saying, "Can you do something?" And he just felt like he couldn't just sit there. And so that's part of it. And I'd like to think that we can tap the best of team to see that teammates can not only, or need to exist, not only between the white lines, but outside the white lines.
Mm.
That is the ultimate teammate. And I'll tell you a quick story. A couple of guests on our podcast, one was Sean Doolittle from the Nationals.
Yep.
One was Oral Hershiser from the Dodgers, that both said that when they learned about Floyd and heard about it and then heard the stories from teammates that were their teammates for years, they felt like bad teammates. They said, how do I not know what my teammate is going through and carrying with? And now I understand why there's circles and cliques of Black players or whatever. But he took it very personally, like, I'm a bad teammate because I didn't know that. And they didn't trust me enough to talk to me about it. I thought that says a lot about the potential of what could be really good about engaging on these, that you have allies and that you can still be passionate and still be a gamer, and fans can see the inspiring nature of them going out there and overcoming odds in these circumstances without judgment and saying, okay, yes, this person has this in their life and they're still giving me this incredible performance. It takes time to reconcile that, but I see a lot of potential there.
Yep.
Professor Glanville, that's a great closing thought. The reason we're doing this show is to emphasize the point that sports are not separate from the rest of life. There's a constant intersection between sports and social issues and racial justice and activism. But the way that we can take advantage of that is by using sports as a vehicle to discuss this, to make this not taboo, but a part of everyday conversation, so that as white people like Danny and I, we're not left in the dark knowing that the experiences of our Black peers are hurting them inside, but instead we're embracing them, we're learning from them, we're working to make this world a better place, all while taking sports as a vehicle to discuss those changes. So thank you for joining us today. We've got lots more episodes to come over the coming months. We're going to dive into a different topic each episode. So stick with us. And thank you again, Professor Glanville and Danny. This was a great start to our show.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
No way.